Gilman in the cannabis practice group, as well as a tax and corporate attorney. Been working with the legislature on aspects of the bill, and just kind of giving guidance to clients on the areas that we know. I don't know if anybody just came off of the Monroe County Bar Association CLE continuing legal education that we just did with myself, Senator Jeremy Cooney, Axel Burnaby from the governor's office, and public defender Jill Paperno, where we just had a 90-minute discussion about the law. So we're gonna, obviously get into more of it today, provide some insights that we can, and field questions. So, be sure to continue to ask questions, because I think Zach and I agree that is by far the most fun part, because it gets a little dry if we're just kind of reading through the law line by line.
Yep, and so just a reminder, folks who have registered for this event have the opportunity to ask questions. We are live streaming this on social media, but we don't interact with it at the moment. So yeah, folks who have registered for this call, one of the perks for registration is to interface with us, the panelists, and you have a couple options. You can drop questions in the chat, and you can click, there's a button. If you click the chat button down at the bottom and it says to, and in blue, it should say panelists, or you can click and say panelists and attendees. I'd recommend clicking that panelists and attendees so the community can be part of the conversation. You also have the Q&A button where you can drop questions direct, and then we can record them. So we are waiting on two other presenters, but we'll probably start moving forward even without them. And once they jump on, we'll welcome them. It'll be Mary Kruger, who's the executive director of NORML. And oh, Penelope, I see that you're here, but you might be in the audience. I will work on sending you the invitation again. You will have to log in through the link I sent you through your email, but we'll take that offline. And yeah, Penelope Hamilton, who is the one of the founders of Western New York NORML, as well as a major, one of the backbones of what was the medical cannabis community is now the cannabis community, large medical and consumer advocacy group. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to jump into again, Article 3, which is outlining medical cannabis within the state. We picked off on, we're just about to get into registered organizations, ROs, but the last thing we left off on was Section 33, which is registration as a designated caregiver facility. Actually, I'm going to just do one little edit here. I'm gonna stop share and reset. Okay, great. All right, cool. Can we see this, Jason?
Oh.
Thumbs up, great. All right, actually, Jason, would you be willing to take this initial opening? Oh, Penelope's on, that's great, so I don't gotta take care of it. I'll actually take the lead. So folks, just the way we lay this out, there is yellow highlighted things that have stood out to myself or other folks on the panel. Looks like we got Mary and Penelope coming at the same time, welcome. And so these highlighted sections are just ways for us to kind of like, things that caught our eye, because there's definitely a lot of jargon in here that we'll work on our fast forward button to kind of kind of brush over quickly some of the fine print that is less informing but more standard, and we'll make sure that's clear once we pass by. But again, folks who are on this call, please keep the questions flowing. It allows for like the most, I think, influential experience for all of us, for us to have this overview centered around dialogue. So again, welcome Mary and Penelope. We appreciate y'all being here. And yeah, let me know when y'all are ready, and yeah, feel free to jump in at any point in time.
Thanks, Zach. I am good to go.
Cool. Mary, if you want to introduce yourself quickly, we have a moment for that, and welcome it.
Sure thing. So I'm not sure what Zach has said about me. I'm sure only good things. But my name is Mary Kruger. I am the founder and executive director of NORML. We are the Rochester chapter of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. We are a cannabis consumer advocacy organization. So here to offer our input from that perspective.
Great. Hey, Jason, was that a little laggy for
Zach,
you?
can you hear me okay? It says I have unstable internet.
Yeah, you were pretty laggy there, Mary. It started off fine, but then it came back pretty, it was skipping.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Let me fix.
Yep. Sounds good. Penelope, you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Hi, Zach. Yes, I am Penelope Hamilton. I'm the executive director over at Western New York NORML, that National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, over in the counties on the western side of the state. So that centralized Buffalo, and I'm actually in Genesee County. So whoever needs a voice, we help them gather that for advocacy. And I'm also a community director over with the cannabis community, as Zach mentioned earlier. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you both for being here. I think from here we'll dive in. So everyone our hope was to bring a group of folks together who offer different perspectives and comments to, again, make this a rich experience for all of us. So we all know the deal on our side, so let's move forward. So section 33 we left off with a registration as a designated caregiver facility. So if you folks recall, there are caregivers, folks who can, receive, distribute, administer medical cannabis to registered patients, and that would be a registered caregiver or a designated caregiver. And then this is expanding upon what a caregiver facility would be. So caregiver facility is to obtain or amend or renew registration as a designated caregiver facility, the facility shall file registry application with the office. The registry application or renewal application shall include the full name and address, the operating certificate or license number where appropriate, which I think is interesting, that you may be a caregiver facility but not necessarily need an operating certificate or license number. I'm curious what those categories would be. Jason, or if anyone has any thoughts there.
I think that's probably kicked out to the regulation, is my guess.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if that applies to like a medical home grow caregiver, like maybe they don't need a license number, but they have an operating certificate, etc.
It does seem too that just coming off of the previous CLE, Axel did kind of indicate that there were going to be some, I think, substantial regulations around home grow. I think it was more in the context of the adult use, but I imagine that they'll be relatively applicable to medical too.
Yeah, I picked that up as well. So they also need the name, title, signature of an authorized facility representative, and then a statement the facility agrees to secure and ensure proper handling of all medical cannabis products. So nothing crazy, but just I thought it was interesting, the operating certificate or licensing number, because I think that does allude to we're so familiar with medical conversation being around registered organizations. So these big multi-state operators with tons of money. And now we're beginning to talk about other people who can also provide medicine to folks. And so we're beginning to see it diversified from that certificate or license number, et cetera. And then E, an acknowledgement that a false statement on the application is punishable. And any other information required by the board. Prior to issuing or renewing a designated caregiver facility registration, the office may verify the information submitted by the applicant. The applicant shall provide at the office request such information and documentation, including any consents or authorization that may be necessary for the office to verify the information. So all pretty standard here. The office shall approve or determine an application incomplete within 30 days of receipt of an application. So that's pretty standard throughout this document, that they have a response within 30 days. And then if the application is approved within the 30-day window, the registration shall be issued within a reasonable time. an individual should also have a 30-day from the time of notification of an incomplete or factually inaccurate application. So basically, if your application gets denied, there's a 30-day window to submit materials to complete or revise or substantiate the information within the application. So I think that's just, again, standard across the board, that there is, if you get denied, there's a window to correct. Registrations on this issue will remain valid for 2 years from the date of issuance. ROs, Jason, you want to pick this up?
Sure. A registered organization shall be a for-profit business entity or not-for-profit corporation. Just as an aside, all of them are for-profit right now in New York. Organized for the purpose of acquiring, possessing, manufacturing, selling, delivering, transporting, distributing, or dispensing cannabis for certified medical use. So right there is your vertical integration requirement in the medical side. The acquiring, possession, manufacture, sale, delivery, transportation, distribution, or dispensing of medical cannabis by a registered organization of this article in accordance with its registration under this article or a renewal thereof shall be lawful under this chapter.
I'm curious, Jason, sorry to interrupt you, but back to, like you said, the requirement for vertical integration. If let's say I interpret the acquiring, processing, manufacturing, selling, delivering, transporting, distributing, or dispensing, do you think the or pertains to distributing or dispensing, or is it any one of those things for cannabis for certified medical use? Because I didn't necessarily interpret that as a mandate for vertical integration.
There currently is. That's more of like an acknowledgement of the vertical integration. That's not the actual requirement, but there is currently a requirement for vertical integration. I don't know if they're going to break it up or not at all. If there's somebody who could just be a medical dispensary or something like that. I'm also interested to see just kind of if other applicants go into the medical side of things. It'll just be very interesting because traditionally that has not been the case for the past 7 years. It's been 10. Well, first it was 5 ROs and then it got expanded to 10. So yeah. Number 3. Each registered organization shall contract with an independent laboratory permitted by the board to test medical cannabis produced by the registered organization. The board shall approve the laboratories used by the registered organization, including sampling and testing protocols and standards used by laboratories, and may require that registered organizations use a particular testing laboratory. The board is authorized to issue regulations requiring the laboratory to perform certain tests and services.
I do think it's interesting. Standardization is a big issue across the board when it comes to testing, quality control. It's like, every state, every lab, this is an overstatement, but it tends to seem like there's no uniform protocol, let's just say. So I think it'd be curious to see what kind of like the particular testing laboratory or the particular tests and standards within that laboratory. I think that'll be very interesting to see how that evolves over time, of like, what are the mandates, what's the baseline.
It's especially interesting when you consider the flower component now legal in medical use and obviously on the adult use side, in regards to like even just testing for THC, where in the plant do you test it? So hopefully like there will be some regulations that kind of determine that, but you test on the cola of the plant versus somewhere else, you could get very different THC ratings, and then that obviously is probably going to translate down to price differentials at retail. So you want to ensure that they didn't test the top, but you're getting the bottom, which may be substantially less THC, but that's what you're paying for the top. So it'll be very interesting to see if and how that's regulated.
Yep.
So we got a couple of questions.
So let's see. So yeah, I guess the long story short of Matt's question, having previously worked in the California adult use market and observing testing labs, they have quite a bit of power and there's a tremendous demand on them. So who are the major testing companies in New York State? What are the opportunities that might be in this sphere?
So Wadsworth is the only one approved, I believe.
That's down in Albany.
Yeah, and they're, you know, obviously that needs to change because that's going to be a massive bottleneck. Everybody is going to have to test their product. And we did see that actually as a problem in California, where they, you know, they didn't have enough labs and created a massive shortage at retail because they couldn't get enough product on the shelves. So, you know, hopefully we do see people trying to obtain those testing licenses, and getting those facilities approved because they're absolutely a critical part of the chain.
Agreed. So definitely a big opportunity, but high overhead.
This is something that we did speak to Senator Diane Savino about already, and she was curious as well. And she actually asked us, do we have any ideas that we could help to lure companies in to get themselves established? And as far as for adult use, for patients, we really expressed and explained to her the need for the consumer to be able to test their plant when we're doing homegrown now, you know, for adult use. So that, you know, and that's an area where she was not, you know, never crossed her mind. So we're doing a lot of educating and trying to get that, you know, Albany to understand as well.
And
One of the big issues too is you can't take advantage of other state labs. You can't transport cannabis across state lines. So they have to be New York labs. And right now there's like one.
Totally. And you know what, it's not that existing labs haven't tried as well. I know a few different laboratories that have been interested in becoming testers, and just the amount of overhead or, you know, it has essentially, the state has been hesitant to permit anyone besides Wadsworth to become like one of the processing facilities, specifically under the hemp industry. And we've seen this bottleneck. So most people ship their samples out of state to get tested because of the bottleneck. And you layer hemp, CBD, cannabinoids, as well as medical, as well as THC adult use. It's, you know, there's gonna be a ton of testing. And yeah, as a bottleneck, that could be pretty disastrous.
And you also got to make sure, as the law, you know, constantly repeats throughout both medical and adult use, is they are independent. So a person or an entity going in for a testing lab can't have any other licenses, or else, I mean, obviously that's just a huge conflict of interest, not to mention violating the law. So, you know, you have to have these kind of singular minded people or entities that, you know, they're just in it for the science, the testing, and that's it. So, you know, hopefully we do have those people though.
And just Matt asked you a follow-up question. So what needs to happen for there to be more labs in New York? I mean, I think first and foremost, the regulations need to come out. I think that's probably the foundation. It'll define what the requirements are, you know, the standards of operation and cleanliness, et cetera. So I do think that that's going to be part of what we're all waiting for. And there's some folks who will be looking specifically for that cue. Brian, curious, I see you left a comment saying NIST has stated a study for sample prep standards for flower. We participated and would like to see this apply to other products. I'm curious if you can expand more just what NIST stands for. I'm happy to, if you have any of that standard, if you want to send that into the chat, would be happy to look at any information there too. All right, so as we continue, so we just got past 3, so I think we're at 4.
All right.
4A.
Let's see. Okay. Registered organization may lawfully, in good faith, sell, deliver, distribute, or dispense medical cannabis to a certified patient or designated caregiver upon presentation to the registered organization of a valid registry identification card for that certified patient or designated caregiver. When presented with a registry identification card, the RO shall provide to the certified patient or designated caregiver a receipt which shall state the name, address, identification number of the RO, the name and registry identification number of the certified patient, and the designated caregiver, if any, the date the cannabis was sold. Any recommendation or limitations by the practitioner, and the form and quantity of medical cannabis sold. The RO shall retain a copy of the registry identification card and the receipt for 6 years and shall make such records available to the office.
So a lot of data on there. I mean, I'm sure it's going to be pretty streamlined, condensed. If you've ever purchased cannabis in another state and got, you know, one of the labels, like there's a lot of information on these like jars or labels. I'm curious if we think that New York State's what we want is any different than any other states. Is it more or less? And just interesting that the six, you know, keeping receipt for and records for 6 years, you know, just a lot about traceability across the board, whether you're a registered organization or adult use. You know, keeping your receipts is going to be an important thing.
It'll be interesting to see what type of database is used in terms of, you know, holding. It says my connection's unstable. Am I okay, or can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Good. Okay. Let me know if I start to break up. But when I was living in Oregon and was, you know, buying from their regulated adult use market, I asked questions about, because there was limitations around how much we could buy in a day. And I asked questions about, well, what happens if I go to this other dispensary, like right after I go here? Are they going to know that I just came here? There was no connection in Oregon at the time, where it was literally just siloed between each dispensary, which I really liked as a consumer, because to me, I'm like, where is my information going to go and who's going to be able to see it if it is in this database that other dispensaries are being able to get access to? So it'll be interesting to see what type of consumer information is held from an adult use perspective and medical.
I believe, you know, feel free to correct if I'm wrong, that right now everything is siloed. You know, for regular, you know, pharmaceutical drugs, there's like iStop, which is you know, goes across pharmacies, so people can see, you know, how much a patient has been prescribed of opioids or something like that, and if somebody is trying to obtain opioids that they shouldn't or anything like that. But I don't think, as of right now, there's anything like that in New York as in regard to cannabis. And I'm pretty sure in Massachusetts it's the same way, because I know they have the limitations per day, but I think you can just kind of go the next day and it doesn't matter. So.
All right, I can pick up this next part. Just B, the proprietor of a registered organization shall file or cause to be filed any receipt and certification information with the office by electronic means on a real-time basis. So that sounds like, as the board shall require by regulation, when filing receipt and certification information electronically pursuant to this paragraph, the proprietor of the registered organization shall dispose of any electronically recorded prescription information in such manner. So to me, that sounds like whenever there's a transaction, it's going to be sent, it's somehow sent to the board in real time.
I mean, that's probably all part of their back end system that just, you know, kind of populates as things come in.
That's what I would expect, but it is interesting, like the proprietor, you know, just the language they use there seems like less streamlined, let's just say. A no registered organization may sell, deliver, distribute, or dispense to any certified patient or designated caregiver of a quantity of medical cannabis larger than that the individual will be allowed to possess in this chapter, which we go down to say that they shall not dispense an amount greater than a 60-day supply to a certified patient until the certified patient has exhausted all but a 7-day supply provided pursuant. So basically, once you know, there's I don't know what's that percentage, you know, what's 7 out of 60, you know?
A patient at most can possess 67 days worth of medical cannabis, but only within the last 7 days. If you're outside that last 7 days, 60-day supply.
Well, and even just, you know, 7. So basically
11% or something.
11%. Yeah. Once you get down to 11%, they can re-up, as they say. So, and pretty standard there, you know, this paragraph. So consulting, prescription monitoring program, the registry. So there will be cross references. It seems at least the intent is to cross reference what your prescription is and making sure that it's not being abused, et cetera. So C is medical cannabis dispensed to a certified patient or designated caregiver by a registered organization shall conform to any recommendation or limitation by the practitioner as to the forms or form of medical cannabis or dosage for the certified patient. When a registered organization sells, delivers, distributes, or dispenses medical cannabis to a certified patient or designated caregiver, it shall provide that individual safety insert, and that safety insert should say have the methods for administrating medical cannabis, any potential danger stemming from the use of cannabis, how to recognize what problematic usage of medical cannabis and obtain appropriate services or treatment for problematic usages, and other information deemed or as determined by the board. So I think that's just interesting. Get ready for the how-to guide. Registered organizations shall not be managed or employed by anyone who has been convicted within 3 years of the date of hire of any felony related to the functions or duties of operating a business, except that if the board determines that the manager employees is otherwise suitable to be hired, or hiring the managers and employees would not compromise public safety. And so it really comes down to the board's discretion. So it says you cannot, but there's board's discretion. So then in determining which offenses are substantially related to the functions of duties of operation of the business, the board shall include, but not be limited to the following. So they're looking at felony convictions involving fraud and money laundering and forgery or other unlawful conduct related to owning and operating a business. Felony convictions for hiring an employee, employing or using a minor in transporting, carrying, selling, giving away, preparing for sale, or peddling any controlled substance. And a felony for the sale or possession of drugs, narcotics, or controlled substances is not substantially related. This subdivision shall only apply to managers and employees who come into contact with or handle medical cannabis. So again, it's kind of, go ahead, Mary.
I was just going to say, I interpret that as you could have a felony conviction for possession alone of marijuana, and that does not exclude you from being a manager or employee. Like, you don't even need the board's discretion to still be able to be a manager or employee. Is that correct, Jason, or am I misinterpreting
I believe so,
that?
because it's all really dealing with what could be more considered like the sale, like the, I guess, wholesale side of things.
Or I think like white collar crimes too is how I'm
yeah.
interpreting it as well.
Definitely, like if you're involved in things that like would be traditionally like dishonest, fraud, embezzlement, that kind of thing, that's where they're going to be concerned, because right, like you're being charged with this highly regulated, technically federally controlled substance. They want to make sure that you don't have a history of defrauding the government and things like that when dealing with these super controlled substances. So I mean, I there's definitely a rationale behind it that's probably good, but I don't know how it actually plays out. Is somebody who's convicted of that and has served their time, should they be barred? I don't know, because technically, if you go to jail for something or whatever, you've paid your debt to society. Should you be considered free from that stigma? So I don't know if there's ever been any kind of like sociological or any kind of look into that, but it'd be interesting.
Yeah, great. So to continue, so I think we're at the manufacturing. So manufacturing of medical cannabis by a registered organization shall only be done in a secure facility located in New York, which may include a greenhouse, which is interesting, which may include a greenhouse. So they're opening that up, that it doesn't have to be just indoor cultivation for medical, for manufacturing specifically. The board shall promulgate regulations to establish requirements for such facilities. Dispensing of medical cannabis by a registered organization shall only be done in an indoor, enclosed, secure facility located in New York. And the board will also make some specifications there. A registered organization may contract with a person or entity to provide facilities, equipment, or services that are ancillary to the registered organization's function or activities under this article, including but not limited to shipping, maintenance, construction, repair, and security, provided that the person or entity shall not perform any function or activity directly involving the planting, growing, tending, harvesting, processing, or packaging of cannabis plants, medical cannabis, or medical cannabis products being produced by the registered organization, or any other function directly involved in manufacture or retailing medical cannabis. All laws and regulations applicable to such facilities, equipment, and services shall apply to the contract, and registered organizations and other parties to the contract shall each be responsible for the compliance of such issues.
Zach, I have a question here. I noticed manufacturing is what's going to be allowed in greenhouses here. What's the difference between manufacturing and processing? Is it processing is you're taking the plant and turning it into another product, or manufacturing is something like trimming or just packaging the flower?
I think, isn't it kind of opposite of what you just said? Like, because under like the hemp law, they have processing and manufacturing is like combining the extract with something, where processing is pulling the extract out. Isn't that right?
Yeah, and it's interesting too that like manufacturing medical cannabis by a registered organization shall only be done at a secure facility located in New York, which may include a greenhouse, which is like, you got to think of like, I mean, all of the any manufacturers on this call, you know, cultivation generally has not been considered part of the manufacturing process. It is its own license. But maybe from the perspective of vertical integration, they're calling it manufacturing. The entire process is the manufacturing process. And so it's opening up the door to having access to greenhouses in the initial stages.
Interesting. I just noticed that difference in language of manufacturing versus processing. So thank you.
No, I appreciate that.
We have a question now, though. I don't know if you want to answer it now or not.
Oh, yeah. What's it? For sure. So yeah, Matt asks, can we review the reasons why people should consider getting a medical recommendation instead of just being an adult user? My recollection is lower taxes when you purchase, you can legally grow at home sooner, as early as October, and you're protected under human rights law.
So yes, all of those things. The medical cannabis tax is 7% versus, I don't know, somewhere around maybe 30-ish% or so on adult use for flower. You can legally grow at home 6 months versus 18 months from the first sale. So as Axel kind of said on the last call, that could be 2 to 3 years from now, easily. And the last one, yes, you're protected under New York human rights law, no different than a disability. You know, that's kind of like ADA compliance stuff, reasonable accommodations in workplaces. You know, the adult use law does have some of those protections. So like you can't be fired for testing positive for cannabis, but the human rights law kind of goes a step further and says you need to make reasonable accommodations and you can't be discriminated against. You are basically a protected class at that point.
Penelope or Mary, you have any other thoughts?
Depending on where you live, you may be able to get, actual advice and counsel on using medical cannabis. Just because you think this is old hat for you, there's a lot to learn, and we're learning all the time. We're not sure if all the products will be on both sides, and we do have pharmacists on site at our dispensaries. So.
Yeah, and that was something that Axel said on the last call, Jason, was that a lot of folks who are consuming cannabis are self-medicating. And so from that perspective, even if it's hybrid of adult use and self-medicating, having access to a professional that can provide insight is always a valuable thing, for sure. Oh yeah, great question, Matt. And thanks for sharing that link, Brian. We can copy and paste that and put it in the chat. Jason, do you want to pick up on 12?
Sure. ROs shall be deemed a healthcare provider for purposes of Title 2D of Article 2 of the Public Health Law. Medical cannabis shall be dispensed to a certified patient or designated caregiver in a sealed and properly labeled package. The labeling shall contain the information required to be included in the receipt provided to the certified patient or designated caregiver by the registered organization. The package date, any applicable date by which the medical cannabis should be used. A warning stating this product is for medical use only. Women should not consume during pregnancy or while breastfeeding, except on the advice of certifying healthcare practitioner, and in the case of breastfeeding mothers, including the infant's pediatrician. This product might impair the ability to drive, keep out of reach of children. The amount of individual doses contained within, and a warning that medical cannabis must be kept in the original container in which it was dispensed. The board is authorized to make rules and regulations restricting the advertising and marketing of medical cannabis. A registered organization shall operate in accordance with minimum operating and record-keeping requirements determined by the board in regulation. Registering of registered organizations. An applicant for registration as a registered organization under Section 34 of this article shall include such information prepared in such manner and detail as the board may require, including but not limited to a description of the activities in which it intends to engage in as an RO. The applicant is of good moral character, possesses or has the right to use sufficient land, buildings, and other premises, which shall be specified in the application, and equipment to properly carry on the activities described in the application, or in the alternative, post a bond of not less than $2 million. So, very accessible.
So it's interesting that it's like, it's not only the land, the buildings, but then it sounds like you may also have to have the equipment or the bond. And it's like, so what do you do if you're going to grow, if you plan on growing X amount of flower and extracting X amount of product, that means like you need your growing facility, you need your extraction facility, you need all equipment to be there within to actually justify, or you need a $2 million bond. Like,
it sounds like you need a minimum of $2 million to engage in an application for medical, which will be tough for the majority of people.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of jargon in these next sections. So if we want to fast forward at any point, use your best discretion. I'm open to it.
All right. It's able to maintain effective security. Is able to comply with all applicable state laws and regulations.
Labor peace agreement.
Yep, labor peace agreement. These are very similar to the adult use ones that we'll get to. The applicant's status is a for-profit business entity or not-for-profit corporation, and the application shall include the name, residence, address, and title of each of the officers and directors, and the name and residence and address of any person or entity that is a member of the applicant. Each such person, if an individual or lawful representative, if a legal entity, shall submit an affidavit with the application setting forth any position of management, interest, or ownership during the preceding 10 years of 10% or greater interest in any other cannabis business or applicant located in or outside this state. So that's interesting that they are going to actually make people disclose outside of New York. I don't recall, but I don't think that that's a requirement in the adult use side.
Yeah, I don't think so either. But it says for 10%, 10 per. I mean, so that's like, if it's below 10% interest, you don't have to disclose it.
That's how I read it.
Yeah.
Let's see. Whether such person or business has been convicted of any felony or had a registration or license suspended or revoked in any administrative or judicial proceeding, and if applicable, the history of violations or administrative penalties with respect to any license to cultivate, manufacture, distribute, or sell adult use cannabis or medical cannabis, and such other information as the board may require. The applicant shall be under a continuing duty to report to the office any change in facts or circumstances reflected in the application, or newly discovered or occurring facts or circumstances which is required to be included in the application. The board shall grant a registration or amendment to a registration under this section if they are satisfied that the applicant will be able to maintain effective control against diversion of cannabis. The applicant will be able to comply with all applicable state laws. The applicant and its officers are ready, willing, and able to properly carry on the manufacturing or distributing activity for which a registration is sought. The applicant possesses or has the right to use sufficient land, buildings, equipment to properly carry on the activities described in the application. It is in the public interest that such registration be granted, including but not limited to whether the number of ROs in the area will be adequate or excessive to reasonably serve the area, whether the registration organization is a minority and or woman-owned business enterprise, a service-disabled veteran-owned business, or from communities disproportionately impacted by the enforcement of cannabis prohibition. Zach, can you go up a little? Thank you. Whether the registered organization provides education and outreach to practitioners, whether the registered organization promotes the research and development of medical cannabis and patient outreach, the affordability of medical cannabis products offered by the registered organization, whether the registered organization is culturally, linguistically, and medically competent to provide services to unserved and underserved areas, and whether the registered organization promotes racial, ethnic, and gender diversity in their workforce. The applicant has, and its managing officer of good moral character. The applicant has entered into a labor peace agreement. The applicant satisfies any other conditions of the board.
So it's interesting to just see the layout of, like, you know, if you were prepping, let's say someone on this call was prepping to apply, obviously you need to know, do your diligence and have access to the resources, but even just those questions and expectations, you know, how do you begin to identify whether or not you're in an area that's saturated or not? Obviously the board has a lot of decision there, but beginning to prove out each one of these steps, like as we continue to look at the law, and then in turn, when we begin to see the regulations come out, like we'll begin to see this broken down a little bit more deeply, but it's still paving the way for folks who are looking to get licenses to understand what kind of questions or proof they're going to have to show up with. So like, how do you as a business begin to organize yourself to be able to present such things as we're looking at these checklists? So then B, I mean, it's pretty standard. B is like, if the board's not satisfied, you know, they can notify the applicant if they require further evidence, and then within 30 days of the receipt of such notification, the applicant may submit additional information. So that 30-day window. The fee for the registration under this section shall be an amount determined by the board.
I think historically it was 10 grand.
Yeah, and if it's going to be more than a period of 2 years, then it'll be issued or increased pro rata for an additional month of the validity for each additional month. Registrations issued under this section shall be effective only for the ROs and shall specify the name and address of, you know, this is all pretty darn standard, the name and address, the activities that they're going to be permitted, the land, buildings, facilities to be used for permitted activities, and other information that the board may deem necessary. So we got a question. So the question is, Jessica says, I just received a commercial liability umbrella policy renewal for one of the buildings my boss owns, and it has cannabis exclusion clause. It is from Star Insurance. Do you happen to know of any insurance companies that are going to issue policies to any cannabis businesses? Great question.
There are some. There's definitely some. I don't think right now we should be saying anything, giving out recommendations, but you can certainly contact us, and I think we can put you in contact with some. I definitely have talked to at least one that is a commercial insurer that will do cannabis.
Great. Yeah, great question. And yeah, we hope to cover that more thoroughly as we move forward. And yeah, it's kind of peer-to-peer at this point. All right. So
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, go for it.
I'm sorry, my internet had cut out, so you may have answered this. Were all those stipulations that we were reading about, are they like, so when they're choosing somebody out of the social equity applicants, are you going to get, I don't want to say points, because I don't know how they're going to do this or score it, but if you offer some of these things that were suggested, is that going to be a benefit? Like if you're doing education, if you're culturally, linguistically, and medically, is that something that you need to look at your business plan? I mean, is that something you need to work in if you want to be ahead of it?
As I understand it, there may indeed be a literal point system where you get points for little things along the way, and it may be the difference between 1 point that allows someone to get a license or not. And so when we're thinking about what will credit you, and when we're seeing what the law is outlining and what businesses should begin to consider, I think all of these things will have an impact when it's, there's 200 applicants or 1,000 applicants, and I do think the point system will come into play personally.
And as Axel said on the CLE, you know, there's sticky constitutional issues. You can't have quota systems of we want X percentage of, you know, African Americans. You can't do that. But you can do these point systems where essentially you give bonus points to the groups that you want to kind of promote, and thus, you know, the most points would go through or something like that. So yes, probably, if not outright point system, they're probably keeping kind of tallies on the side of the applications just to make sure that they're checking the boxes to hit their goals, that kind of thing. So yeah, that's kind of the constitutionally permissible way to get around that whole discriminatory issue.
All right, thanks.
To just continue, number 4 says a registration issued under this section should be valid for 2 years from the date of issue, except that in order to facilitate the renewals for such registration, the board may, upon initial application for registration, issue some registrations which may remain valid for a period greater than 2 years, not exceeding an additional 11 months. The application for renewal or any registration issued under this section shall be filed with the board not more than 6 months nor less than 4 months prior to the expiration of, and a late filed application for the renewal of registration may, in the discretion of the board, be treated as an application for an initial license. So if you're late, it may restart your application process. And the application for renewal shall include such information prepared in the manner of any material change in the circumstances or factors listed, every known change or investigation pending or concluded during the period of the registration by any government or administrative agency with respect to each incident or alleged incident involving theft, loss, possible diversion of medical cannabis manufactured or distributed by the applicant, and B, compliance by the applicant with the laws of the state with respect to cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, and the sale of medical cannabis for adult use cannabis where applicable. And then C, an applicant for renewal shall be under a continued duty to report to the board any changes. That's pretty standard across the board. And if the board is not satisfied that the registered organization is entitled to a renewal of registration, the board shall, with responsibly practicable time as determined by the executive director, serve upon the registered organization or its attorneys of record in person or by registered or certified or mail an order directing the RO to show cause why its application for renewal should not be denied. The order shall specify in detail the respects in which the applicant has not satisfied the board. So it does sound like, again, as we've seen, if you're going to get denied, or in this case revoked or not renewed, it'll be presented as to why, and then you'll have the opportunity to contend against that. And yeah, so the board shall renew a registration unless he or she determines and finds that the application is unlikely to maintain effective control. That diversion is a big thing, leakage, diversion, etc. So we see that it seems to be the first point through and through. The applicant is unlikely to comply with all state laws, and it's not in the public interest to renew a registration number because the number of registered organizations in the area is excessive to reasonably serve the area, and the applicant has either violated or terminated its labor peace agreement or has substantively violated the laws of another jurisdiction in which they operate or have operated a cannabis license or registration related to the operation of the cannabis business. For the purpose of this section, proof that a registered organization during the period of its registration has failed to maintain effective control against diversion violates any provision of this article or has knowingly or negligently failed to comply with the applicable state laws relating to the activities in which it engages under the registration may constitute grounds for suspension, termination, etc. The RO shall also be under continuing duty to report to the office any material change or fact of circumstance. And then the board may suspend or terminate the registered organization on the grounds of using procedures under this article related to a license to the extent consistent with the article. So it really does bring it back to the powers within the board and determining. You want to take this next section, Jason, starting at 8?
The RO that manufactures medical cannabis may have no more than 4 dispensing sites wholly owned and operated by such registered organization. Such registered organization may have an additional 4 dispensing sites, provided, however, that the first 2 additional dispensing sites shall be located in underserved or unserved geographic locations as determined by the board. The board shall ensure that such registered organizations and dispensing sites are geographically distributed across the state and that their ownership reflects the demographics of the state. So that's odd to me because they're ROs, like they're multi-state operators. How are they going to reflect the demographics of the state and their ownership? Like, this is probably never going to happen. And B, I get the point of wanting to locate dispensaries in these areas, but let's also face the reality of the situation. Medical cannabis is expensive. Getting a prescription or a recommendation for it can be expensive. There's a lot of cost barriers. So to put a dispensary in some of these locations, could be saying to the ROs, hey, we know you're not going to make money in this situation. So it puts them in a hard position. But again, it's kind of the carrot and stick approach. If you want up to 8 dispensaries, yeah, you might have to take a loss on a couple of them. But it's interesting that they're putting on all of these types of controls. I get why they're doing it and I support it. I wonder how in practice it's going to work.
Well, and what does it mean that the board shall ensure that such registered organizations are geographically distributed across the state and that their ownership reflects the demographic of the state? Like, isn't it all white men except for one RO right now?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't understand how you can possibly do that. Like, they are, other than the one, they're all multi-state operators. And, some of them could be even publicly traded for all I know. I haven't looked into all of them, but I don't understand how you could really realistically ever fulfill that last portion. It just, ideally, sure, great, that would be wonderful, but in practice, I don't know if that's even possible. But maybe that could also be, them kind of teeing up that they want more medical applicants, like company applicants, and thus, will clearly prioritize those that reflect their ownership reflects the
underserved demographics. Yeah.
So maybe that's them opening the window to more applicants, which would be good. I mean, we shouldn't have the medical market dominated by 10 ROs, 9 of which are multi-state operators.
It is interesting to that clause of only 4, but you can have 4 more if. And we'll see how that grows.
And then remember too, like that would be 4, and then 3 of the 4 could also be adult use if they get that adult use all-encompassing license.
Yeah. Did we do 9 already? I don't think we did.
No, we haven't.
I think we should read 9, do high level 36, 37, look at 38, and that puts us pretty darn close to being done. So just saying that out loud, so we're on the same page, but let's take it away.
In coordination with the Chief Equity Officer, the board shall register additional ROs to provide services to unserved or underserved areas of the state pursuant to social and economic equity plan established by Section 87 of this chapter. Those additional ROs shall be reflective of the demographics of the state, shall be representative of communities disproportionately impacted by the cannabis prohibition, and be culturally, linguistically, and medically competent to serve unserved and underserved areas of the state. The board shall actively promote racial, ethnic, and gender diversity when registering additional registered organizations. So they clearly are wanting more to come in, but with the $2 million basically minimum way to get into it, we'll see how realistic that is, because I mean, obviously that is just a tremendously huge barrier.
Yeah, absolutely.
Reports of the ROs, they need to report information to the state.
Yeah, so the security tracking, record keeping, record retention, surveillance systems, like it's the comprehensive analysis of the information that they need to be reporting regularly.
Evaluation research programs report by the board. Board may provide analysis and evaluation of the operation of this article. Board may develop and seek necessary federal approval for and carry out research programs relating to medical use of cannabis. That's interesting because you can get approved from the federal government to do cannabis research. You know, you can have a controlled substance license from the DEA, but it's weird too that the board, because the board, it would be the entity performing it, not the board themselves. So that's just weird how it's phrased. The board shall report every 2 years to the governor and the legislature on the medical use of cannabis under this article and make appropriate recommendations. And now we're down to the research license. Board shall establish a cannabis research license that permits a licensee to produce, process, purchase, and/or possess cannabis for the following limited research purposes: to test chemical potency and composition levels, to conduct clinical investigations of cannabis-derived drug products. I think that's a really good one because we really don't have a lot of information on that kind of stuff now, and so that'll really help providers in certifying patients and, you know, hopefully get a better medical product. To conduct research on the efficacy and safety of administering cannabis as part of a medical treatment, and to conduct genomic or agricultural research. As part of the application process for a cannabis research license, an applicant must submit to the board a description of the research that is intended to be conducted, as well as the amount of cannabis to be grown or purchased. The board shall review the applicant's research project and determine whether it meets the requirements of subdivision 1 of the section. In addition, the board will look at project quality, study design, value, and impact, whether the applicant has an appropriate personnel, expertise, facilities, and infrastructure, funding, and human, animal, or other approvals in place to successfully conduct the project, and whether the amount of cannabis to be grown or purchased by the applicant is consistent with the project's scope and goals. The office determines the research project does not meet the requirements of the subdivision. The application must be denied. Cannabis research license may only sell cannabis grown or within its operation to other cannabis research licensees. This isn't a shortcut around.
What's interesting is it doesn't say that they can only buy from another research license. So I'm curious to see what that means and what that does.
Yeah. They can contract with institutions of higher education, including to, but not limited to, hospitals, state universities performing in conjunction with such institution. I can promise you that unless the federal law changes or they have a DEA license, that ain't going to happen because that would jeopardize the educational institution's federal funding. They're not going to do that. In addition to, or in establishing a cannabis research license, the board may adopt regulations on the following: application requirements, renewal requirements, conditions for license revocation, security measures, the amount of plants, usable cannabis concentrates, or cannabis-infused products that they can have on the premises, licensee reporting requirements, conditions under which the cannabis is grown, any additional requirements. Cannabis research license issued to this section must be issued in the name of the applicant. The application fee for a research license shall be determined by the board. Each cannabis research licensee shall issue an annual report to the board, which the board will review.
You know what I'm thinking is maybe we'll pause here because we can pick up just this last section that says ROs and adult use cannabis as we transition into adult use cannabis. So folks who've been following along with us, next session will begin the adult use process, where we'll look at everything from the new licensing structures to amendments to the law and what it means to be a consumer from a possession perspective, et cetera. So we just definitely made it through the thick of the medical, which we hadn't approached last time, and I'm really it's just super fascinating to see the difference in structure. And of course, we're still definitely waiting on the regs, no matter what industry, whatever part of the industry you want to be part of. But it's evident that there's a lot of changes in the medical, and I'm stoked we covered it. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts they want to add before we conclude today's session?
I'll just throw out there that, for anybody who wasn't on the CLE with Axel said, they're going to come up with the regulations. There's a 60-day comment period. They go back and change any regulations, and then another 45-day comment period. And so, I think he seemed to indicate that maybe late summer, we would see the first round of regulations, and then 60 plus 45 is 105 plus however long it takes them to, redo it. So, you could be talking another 6 months beyond that until we see final regulations. or maybe 4 to 6 months. So if that's the case, we could be April of 2022, something like that, March, April of 2022, before we see final regulations. And then we'd probably, start to see licensing applications and stuff like that. And if that's the timeline, you're probably not to legal sales until well into 2022.
Penelope, any closing thoughts?
There's a lot of work to do.
There's definitely a lot of work to do.
So to answer the question that just came in, it's whatever a doctor is willing to, or a practitioner is willing to certify. That's literally the new language in the law. So it's the previous qualifying conditions, I think, plus anything else that a doctor certifies you for. So it's a very, very open, broad, expansive list, however you want to describe it.
Yeah, and we did cover it in the last recording. So section workshop number 4 has that information in it if you want to go back and do a little more studying. Well, great. Thanks everyone who's still on the call. And Jason and Penelope, appreciate you both for making the time and offering your professional perspective on a busy day, I'm sure. So thank you both for being here. And yeah, big thanks to, again, our sponsors and our supporting members. And we will see you all next Tuesday as we begin to dive into Article 4, Adult Use Cannabis. Everyone have a great afternoon. Hopefully wherever you are, the sun's shining and you can get a little bit of sun on your skin today.
Thank you both.
Yeah. All right. Take care.